Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about analysing cartoons. Now, to really cut this short and not talk too much about what cartoons were, they're very much like the memes that you know today, but in a historical context, they had quite significant value. And as a historian, you can have a look at some of the value by analysing the bits and pieces and the elements of the cartoon. It gives us a better understanding of the ideas and the thoughts and the feelings and the prejudices and the fears that a lot of people had at the time during that part of history, and it will give us a greater, understanding of some of these things that were happening. How do you go about analysing a cartoon? Well, I think it's really important that you ask yourself a few questions. Some of these questions can be easily solved and researched, such as, when was it published, who created it, who published it, where. So they're easy, and often when you do your research, you sort through archival material, all those details will be with it. But some of the other questions you should ask yourself is why it was created. What are some of the messages or symbols within the cartoon? Why would the publishers have found reason to publish it? How's the message being conveyed? And these are all really important questions to ask when analysing it, because you'll get a much better and deeper understanding of that particular part of history. So let's have a look at an example. Okay, so this is one of my favourite cartoons, and one of the reasons why I like it so much is because of the amount of information that is in it. And it tells us a lot about the different prejudices, the different fears, the different ideas that were very much popular during the late 1800s in Australia. Now, as I mentioned before, when analysing a cartoon, there are many questions you need to ask. And the first, obviously, are the basic ones: who created the cartoon, who published it, when was it published, and where. And you can find that information out fairly easily, whether you're doing your own research and you find an original source. Often you'll find it maybe in a newspaper or magazine. There'll be dates, there will be attributions to the publisher, to the creator, and so a lot of that is kind of easy to come by. But the other questions that perhaps are a little bit more complex are those that are going to be asking you to try and work out what the messages are, what the hidden meanings are, what was the significance of the publisher and the time and place that they published it. Are there symbols being used in there to give us some sort of indication of these fears and prejudices that we're noticing? So in this one in particular, in this particular cartoon, we see and we can identify very quickly that we have in the centre of the image what looks to be like an Asian or Chinese man. He's dressed in Western clothing, he's holding a coconut, he has a pistol drawn into his belt, and he looks to be a little bit of a businessman. And the reason why we have made that determination is because a lot of this information is set out in this poster that is part of the cartoon. And what does it say? It says South Sea Labour Trade. We see that the language that they're using here is sort of language that we don't use nowadays, but in the late 1800s was probably a little bit more socially acceptable. We see that they're for hire, but I'm just wondering, under their own volition, I don't think so. We see chains being used as symbols or images here to suggest that these people haven't come on their own free will, and are now being sold for what? It says here, cash on delivery, or whips, irons, knives and rifles can be taken in exchange. So, it's really painting a dark picture here. But what's really interesting here is not only is it having a go at, the whole notion of Asians coming here and setting up business and bringing in labour from overseas to take jobs from locals. But there's a little bit of a reference here, subtle reference to the fact that, oh, wait a second, maybe it's the actual monarch in England, the king or queen at the time, and whoever was the monarch in 1886, that they've signed off on it and it's all okay. And so that's a really quite a subtle hint that perhaps there is an anti-British sentiment here. So with all the symbols, with all the images, and with all the information provided in this cartoon, it really is a good example of how the different ideas and fears and prejudices of Australians during this period of history were conveyed. And like many of the contemporary cartoons at the time, they all kind of followed a similar theme, and they were themes that centred on what Australians valued as in racial terms, in economic terms, in social terms. And like I said, this is a great example of it.